can't think as people do. The machine is different.
What marvelous being! How gratifying! How gratifying!
Thank you, Melanie. Well, it's always great to come to OMSI. My son's in the audience. They started coming here when they're 3, and one is 22 and one is 26. So it's a wonderful place, and I'm very happy to be here. To go along with the Frankenstein theme, or as you will find out shortly, Frankenstein, I'm going to tell you a little bit about building and rebuilding bodies. Given that it's Frankenstein, I will show you a little gore, so I hope you're ready for it. Not too much, not the worst. So Frankenstein, or Frankenstein, he bolted a head on and put arms and legs together to make his monster. In my business, we call that process complex composite tissue or organ transplants. Everybody's heard of kidney transplants, heart transplants. They're old school already now, but complex composite transplants are really, really hard, and Frankenstein did an excellent job. They're really, really important to the military because in battlefield trauma, especially these days with IEDs, there's about 10,000 men and women who've had severe catastrophic injuries to their extremities. And these look really bad, and they are, but many of them are much, much worse. So composite tissue transplants, where it's the arm, a leg, a face, where you've got bone, muscle, nerve, skin, those are much, much more difficult. And we're just beginning them these last few years. In the case of an arm transplant, and these are done in 3 centers in America, it takes 2 teams of surgeons, about 20 people in a big OR to put someone's donor arm back on from a cadaver. This is one of these patients that was done through the armed forces as a soldier who unfortunately was a quadruple amputee. And you can see him here with 2 new arms. And I didn't get the video from Andy Lee, who's the head of plastic surgery at Hopkins and my colleague for many years. But Andy's video, this young man, he has full function of both arms. He drives a car, and he can assemble things, and it's changed his life. And it really is a miraculous example of what Dr. Frankenstein did. Now this is moving ahead, literally, and you might have seen this in the Wall Street Journal, of a head transplant in mice. Now, I can't verify it. I didn't see a video, but apparently the Chinese surgeon has done this 1,000 times in mice. And maybe this is the new frontier. I'm not so sure. I asked my assistant to get a couple things on head transplants, and aside from her rather warped sense of humor, I don't see much future, especially in the near future, in head transplants. So what I'd like to do on a more serious note, not too serious, it's cocktail hour, is to tell you a little bit about the work that we do at the OHSU Center for Regenerative Medicine, where our mission is to replace or restore, regenerate tissues lost to trauma, disease, aging, using cell therapies. And really, it's a big business, and there's clinical trials all over the world where they're trying to regenerate hearts after heart attacks and brain after stroke, treat patients with multiple sclerosis. This list actually goes all the way down to the floor. So there's great hope and sadly great hype in the regenerative medicine field these days. It's a new field in medicine. Our portfolio of regenerative medicine strategies at OHSU, we're trying to work on the heart, muscle regeneration, brain, spinal cord regeneration, nerve, lung, all the way down to regenerating your cornea and your eyes. The other thing you can do, just as an aside, for using stem cells and progenitor cells, is you can use them, they can profoundly modulate adverse diseases of inflammation. So ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome, some forms of brain injury, multiple sclerosis that are caused by inflammation. This is a lung inflammation. In the middle panel, this is what ARDS looks like. Someone's dying in every ICU, every day, every hospital, every city in America. It kills about 200,000 people. No treatment for it. This is what a normal lung looks like. This is what a cell-treated looks like after a single injection. And so this is an important new potential. That's all I'm going to say about using cells for inflammation. Dr. Kenton Gregory is running this program at OHSU. She's in the audience. So stem cells have had a lot of political, religious, social, legal controversy. There's all sorts, it's complicated. There's all sorts of different stem and progenitor cells. The ones in red are the ones we work with at OHSU and our laboratory. We mainly work with the patient's, your own stem cells, trying to get your own body to heal itself. And the best source of your stem cells to regenerate a heart attack or a brain after a bad injury is your bone marrow cells, because there's cells in your bone marrow. It's the central repository for healing in our bodies that can heal almost any tissue. We went to a lecture, in a stem cell lecture, and one of the speakers, they called it the Home Depot of the body. There's something there that can fix everything. We also use what we call allogeneic cells. That's another adult's stem cells for a transplant. And finally, we grow stem cells in vats of media, and they shed their growth factors and all sorts of therapeutic proteins, and the secretome, as we call it. And we think that could be very therapeutic. The largest institute for regenerative medicine, or stem cell therapy in the body, is a partnership between the NIH and the Department of Defense. It's called the Armed Forces Institute of Regenerative Medicine. And it was put together 7 years ago. I've been one of the founding program leaders, and it's to put our men and women who are injured in the last 10 years of war back together again and give them a normal life, or a better life, or a functional life. The project that we're doing and developing at OHSU is to work on catastrophic limb injuries. You'll see in the very top here, this is a special ops soldier who got too close to an IED, and he got some shrapnel in his lower leg. Compared to a lot of extremity injuries, this is a fairly minor injury. As I like to say, if this is my leg, it would be a major injury. What they're doing in the second slide is taking the shrapnel out, but what's happening is there's swelling and pressures building up in the leg, and it will kill all the cells in the leg unless you fillet it open. A fasciotomy, it's a brutal type of surgery, but the only way it's going to save the soldier's leg. It takes months to repair, and the soldier will never walk normally again. It's a situation where your body just can't regenerate itself, a catastrophic cell loss. 8 years ago, we had the idea maybe we could use the bone marrow to regenerate that tissue. So we took bone marrow cells and grew them into a Petri dish, and we were able to grow skeletal muscles that could ultimately contract in a Petri dish. You can't just replace the muscles, you got to replace the nerves, you got to replace or regenerate the blood vessels. And this is work by Dr. Rutten in our laboratory showing that you can take bone marrow and turn it into Schwann cells or nerve cells. And so based on this work, we started treating pigs with severe extremity injuries. And I won't go through all the details of this, but it was funded through a firm. And this is the muscle in the pig leg that we used. A good-sized chunk of meat, and about 80% of it dies, and it never will heal on its own. What we do is take a small sample of bone marrow, about 30 cc's, from local injection from a leg bone, the tibia. We put it into a little Swiss-made centrifuge, and about an hour later, we have about 1 billion cells that we can inject locally to hopefully rebuild the injured muscle and nerve. And that's a mixture of cells. That's the Home Depot. There's cells that can combat inflammation, cells that can regrow skeletal muscle, cells that will regrow nerve, of course, the blue column shows most of the cells in the bone marrow are used to regrow blood cells, red cells and white cells, hematopoietic cells. So this is work. It hasn't been published yet, so you're going to see it hot off the presses. We injured those pigs, that single muscle in the pig leg, the pig's limping around. We injected cells, and then 3 months later, we did a biopsy of the muscle. And this is what a muscle looks like under a confocal laser microscope. That green stuff here clumped together, that's normal looking muscles, and most of the muscle cells have died out here in the middle part of the screen. We label our stem cells or tattoo them with a red dye. So the red flecks are the tattoo on the stem cells. So I'm going to show you our higher power magnification. Those red cells we're bone marrow cells, and they're transitioning into new muscle cells. So they're regenerating the muscle. You can't just put muscles in, you got to put the plumbing in, new blood vessels. And those red labeled cells are bone marrow cells getting together to form an entirely new blood vessel in that muscle. Got to hook up the wiring, and these are red labeled bone marrow cells that are becoming Schwann cells. That's the cells that create myelin around nerves, and it's repairing this nerve, it's regenerating the nerve. And we've replaced the stem cell niches so that as this pig goes on and throughout its life, it can regenerate muscle cells that are lost through aging. And what this means to a soldier is they don't care about the microscope pictures, they care about whether that muscle is going to be strong again. And what we show, I think this is the only graph I get to show, one science graph. The blue markers, or the blue bars, are placebos, where we inject just media, saline, no cells. And the other colored red, yellow, and green bars are cells. And what we show here in a statistically significant manner is that the pigs who get cell treatments, they walk normally. This is what a pig looks like walking on a special 10,000 sensor mat that we teach them to walk on. We rehab them. We put little dots of cookie dough. Pigs do everything for cookie dough. And then what this looks like is a pig with a limp, and then there's one with a cell treatment. And we showed that in a blinded, placebo-controlled way, that these cells help restore normal function. Now, we did 8 years of pig surgeries, and they were always safe, and we always had an improvement in the ability to walk, and the muscle strength, and the nerve conduction. And so the FDA this last fall has approved us to treat the very first person in the world with their own bone marrow cells at OHSU. Thank you. So we have collaborations with military hospitals that will be sending patients here for catastrophic limb injuries, and of course Oregonians. Maybe there'll be a farm injury. It's sadly pretty common, or motor vehicle accidents. And these patients will be able to get injections of their own cells to regenerate their arms and legs and hopefully give them a normal life again. I'm a cardiologist, so I've got to show one thing about heart regeneration. There's some heart stem cells up there. We're in the midst of looking at heart regeneration after heart attacks. This is the only slide I'm going to show because a lot of places around the world are doing heart regeneration. I thought I would show you all Oregonians what's unique about Oregon and what we're doing better and different than everybody else in the world. So one of the most important focuses of our laboratory is looking at neurosurgery and neurology problems. And so we're doing some really exciting work on preventing paralysis after spinal cord injury, the Christopher Reeves injury. I had some good rat videos that showed that we can actually prevent paralysis after acute spinal cord injury. We're working with Wayne Clark in the treatment of stroke patients with stem cells. And finally, we'll be working and starting, actually we will select our first patient to treat severe traumatic brain injury at OHSU. And I'm going to show you something about that. So I talked about transplantation. I've talked about using cells to regenerate new tissues in the body. The other thing we're doing is stimulating the body to heal itself. And in this case, we're developing a non-invasive stimulation of the brain to stimulate regrowth or regenerate synapses in the brain. And this was all funded through the Department of Defense. There's over 100,000 men and women who have permanent brain damage after the last 10 years of war. The Army spent about $2.5 billion. They've tested all sorts of different treatments, and they found one that seemed to actually restore function. Colonel Dallas Hack has lent me these slides. It's using a concept called neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to heal itself, or neuromodulation. And so Kim Burchell, who is just the former chief of neurosurgeon at OHSU, has developed and is a pioneer in deep brain stimulation, where they put an electrode in the brain and stimulate part of it to restore function. We're looking at non-invasive stimulation. By stimulating the brain through receptors in the tongue. It turns out there's 3 nerves that go to your tongue. It's the most innervated structure in the body. And I was going, oh, I don't believe that. I think your fingertips are the most things. So the neuroanatomist said, no, if you have like a single hair in your mouth, you can feel it with your tongue, and you feel which way it goes. I go, oh, that makes sense. But anyway, it's a great place to stimulate the brain because it has electrolyte solutions that are great for conducting electricity. We are borrowing this technology from researchers at the University of Wisconsin who figured out how the brain talks to itself. Electrically. We all talk to ourselves verbally, at least I do, but this is how the brain talks to itself. And I'm not going to go into the electric part of this. To suffice it to say that the nerves connect to the midbrain, which is your unconscious, through the pons, and then just behind the pons is something called the reticular activating structure system formation, the RAS. That's what wakes you up. That turns on the lights when you wake up in the morning. And if you stimulate the tongue, so right here, that black line is where we stimulate the tongue, and these are EEG electrodes all over the brain. And you can see, you don't have to be a neurophysiologist, that something goes on all over the brain when you stimulate the tongue with these little electrodes. And what we're trying to do is to stimulate new synaptic connections. This is pruning. This looks like some neurodegenerative diseases. And pruning is what teenagers do in later parts of teenagerdom. I'm going to show you a video and this is the device. It's a little tongue blade. When you put it on your tongue, I've tried it. It was developed by DARPA and the Department of Defense. It feels like little champagne bubbles or pop bubbles pop, so it's painless. This is a lady who had severe progressive multiple sclerosis. And she can walk. She loved to play the piano. She can't play tennis. She's lost her balance. This is her before her treatment. And she really, most of the time, gets around in a wheelchair. But she's got this, even with the stimulation, this is her first day or two getting the neural stimulation. So you can see she's quite debilitated. Her tennis game has kind of degenerated, as you can see here. But she's going after it. She gets 2 20-minute sessions a day. But within the first week, she's walking without her hands. She's standing on a sponge, closing her eyes, and she's now restored her balance. She's getting better coordinated. In multiple sclerosis, you damage your spinal cord and your brain in different places. This is still just within 2 weeks. So what I'll tell you is there'll be 2 places in the country that get this technology, and we're going to enroll our first patient at OHSU for severe traumatic brain injury tomorrow. Actually, it's next Wednesday. So we are very excited to we competed for 2 years to be one of 2 sites in the country to treat traumatic brain injury in civilians and soldiers. And we also will be the first in the world to use this in about a month to treat spinal cord injury. So we don't know if it's going to work. It worked in this lady and a couple very initial patients. It'll be blinded, so some people will only get control. Fake stimulation. This lady's back playing tennis again. I mean, she's not that good. I think I can take her, but still, I think it's a big improvement. The other thing I'm going to talk about, so I talk about neurostimulation to regenerate tissue, and the last thing I'm going to talk about is using biomaterials. And so there's a lot of facial injuries in the war in civilians, and this is an ear in the Petri dish that was made by my colleague James Xu at Wake Forest, one of the most famous tissue engineering places in the world. So this is a big deal. Now this is just made of collagen. It needs cells. We've been working here at OHSU on using human structural proteins, elastin and collagen. So we've actually found the human genes for the monomer of these polymers, isolated it, and then we amplify it using a fancy bioreactor. So that's about 15 years of research and $15 million in one sentence. We've learned how to, we're all made of nanotechnology, we're all made of nanofibers, so we've learned how to electro-spin nanofibers and make tissue. This is not Frankenstein's lab, but this is our lab, which is a lot cleaner and well lit. A clean room. And we're making new arteries, we're making skin, we're spinning devices, we're doing implants in pigs again, and and this is what that looks like, is that these are nanofibers of human recombinant proteins, bone marrow cells that turned into vessels. We're the first place in the world to do this, probably the only place. And so this is just an example of biomaterials, the last thing we're using for regenerating or replacing tissue. Probably the most exciting place and the most difficult place to do surgery is on Mars. I recently gave a lecture at NASA on tissues, wound healing, trauma in space for exploration on Mars and colonization on the moon. And this is a preview for the Martian this weekend, if you want to watch it here. I'm going to be here with my sons, hopefully. Here's Matt Damon. I have a few concerns about some of the liberties that were taken in this movie, but overall I think they did a great job. Space is a tough place. There's going to be trauma as they do all these extra vehicle activities. The problem in space is wounds don't heal. You can get a paper cut and it won't heal. And now we're beginning to feel that the reason for it is your stem cells don't function. And your stem cells are responsible for all the healing in your body, even if it's a paper cut. So we got to figure these things out. We at OHSU will be part of the team that tries to figure these things out. We've met with the astronauts. When the team that goes to Mars, there will be a physician, there may be two. But a physician astronaut will need, and they're going to get, a 3D tissue printer. They're probably going to get vials of protected stem cells to do stem cell transplants if they have to do surgery or see trauma in space. I've showed you a lot of fun things, a lot of hard work. This is the team that does that hard work. I talk about the hard work. This is the team at OHSU. As I like to say, regenerative medicine is a team sport. It takes chemists, it takes immunologists, it takes biologists, cardiologists, neurologists, neurosurgeons. And it takes a team, a national and an international team that we've put together over the last 20 years with industry, government, universities, all over the world. So thank you for your attention. I'll take some questions if I have time.
After a stroke, being able to prevent paralysis, what about people who are already paralyzed, or not stroke, spinal cord injury?
So we're developing treatments to prevent paralysis from happening in the first place. That's just in rats, but the data looks pretty good, if I may say so. Well, we're using that neurostimulation device to see if we can restore function after spinal cord injury. They're using that device in a site in Canada, because the company that makes the device in Canada, and they've shown some early results in patients, a few. It's not controlled. that show some improvement in brain function after stroke using basically stimulating another part of your brain to recognize that there's, a lot of people who have a stroke, they don't even know they have an arm there. So what you do is you stimulate the tongue, switch on the part of the brain, and then somebody moves the arm for the patient, and this is the way I envision it, and the brain says, hey, look, there's an arm over there. And so that's how I see it, but we'll see. So there's some hope for that. Yes, sir?
How would someone with, is there a way for someone with MS to reach out and see if there's see if they could be part of that trial? Or?
Yes, and I've heard that they're planning on starting a trial. I don't know what city it's going to be based, but the sort of the acronym for the treatment is called PONS, P-O-N-S, and if you Google PONS, it should come up and you can connect. The company is called Helios. It's located in Canada. I think Toronto, Montreal, somewhere like that. Yes, sir? Yes, sir?
Yeah, could you harness the power of lightning to stimulate non-invasive neuromodulation regeneration?
We're not there yet. We're still catching up to Frankenstein, but a great idea. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, could somebody who's had a couple brain surgeries, is there a waiting list for someone like me to get the chance to regrow the left side where I'm working again?
The question is, after brain surgery, is there a waiting list for patients to get neurostimulation or neuromodulation to help restore brain function that was lost to do those surgeries? And I don't think there's any waiting list yet for this. This is a technology incredibly early in its investigation clinically, although they've been working on all of the work figuring out how the brain signals itself for about almost 20 years. If you ever knew how long these things would take, you'd probably never start them. But I'm sorry to say I don't think that there is anything in that area just this yet. What you can do is you can connect with the company, and there's an FDA pathway called compassionate use, where you don't have to be in a clinical trial. They'll hate me for telling you this, where they'll let, and then you have to get special FDA permission for one person, one at a time, for a new indication. So that's the pathway that probably you would have to take if they would go with it. Way up in the top, sir.
What about microgravity prevents tissue damage, regeneration?
Well, microgravity, microgravity probably does prevent tissue damage because you're just floating around, so your impacts are less. But in some of the things, you can get squished up against things. So there's very little known about tissue healing in microgravity or space. But what is known is paper cuts don't heal. Fortunately, there's not been a lot of injuries so far. They haven't done any big-time animal healing studies on the space station, probably for obvious reasons. But they think that the reason that the healing seems to be lessened, if it heals at all, is that one thing that we do know is that stem cells don't function normally without gravity as a cue. And so it may have to do, before the stem cells can actually dive in and do their repair work, they have to migrate through tissue, and it may be that gravity affects migration. Microgravity also affects your bone marrow, so that your bone marrow produces less red blood cells. It produces less stem cells. So space is a hostile place for the human body. You get osteoporosis up there, even if you exercise. So it's a tough place, and it's going to be a very tough place for healing, and hopefully there won't be much surgery needed up there. Yes, sir.
If this is where we're at right now, what is your opinion on where we're going to be in the next 1,500 years as far as regeneration goes, or
50 years. I don't have the vision for 100 years. Well, we've made an unbelievable amount of progress in the last 10 years, last 20 years. The first bone marrow transplant just to replace hematopoietic cells was only 40 years ago. And now we know that we can transplant bone marrow to potentially regenerate arms and legs and other parts, other structures, nerves, maybe the heart. Right now there's no FDA-approved cell treatment aside from bone marrow treatment for hematopoietic cells. I think that's going to come in the next couple of years. I think that we'll be living much longer and much better. I think one of the things we need to do probably today or tomorrow is figure out how to get our own stem cells to work better. So, and how not to poison our own stem cells. So, because they're a key to how we rebuild our tissues every day, regenerate our tissue every day. Way up at the top.
So, if bone marrow can be used to help regenerate back to a normal functioning level, is there any way that it can be used to surpass original function or like go beyond what could have already done beforehand?
I would say that there's a very significant interest by the Department of Defense in that exact area. That's how the neurostimulator started, if you want. It's no longer a secret, but it was developed by DARPA for Navy SEALs so they could improve their visual brain function swimming in murky water. And now I believe they're using it to improve soldier performance. It probably improves cognition. I'm going to learn how to play the guitar. Yes, ma'am.
I know that there can be severe brain trauma that can have behavioral effects on the patient. Is there anything showing in this regeneration that some of those behavioral changes are shifting back to normal, or is that kind of a permanent change or something?
Well, that's a great question. I'm always amazed at how, your DNA can affect behavior, how cells can actually govern behavior. I don't get that. It's too complicated for me, but it's fascinating. I think that I don't know what's going to happen with cells. I think I didn't show you some of the effects of the neurostimulation, though, because when they looked at the patients that had multiple sclerosis, they have the brain is injured in patches all over the brain, and part of those affect behavior. So a lot of those patients they have depression, they have problems with cognition, impulse control, blah, 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 blah. Those have improved along with their ability to walk. That wasn't expected, but they're measuring that now. And we'll be looking at that for the patients with traumatic brain injury with the PONS treatment. So that's one of our endpoints that we'll be following civilians and soldiers with traumatic brain injury, to look for potential improvements in behavior. I think that's possible. There's some evidence to suggest that. Yes, up there. Is the neurostimulation, is cell therapy good for Parkinson's? Well, Dr. Burchell and others have shown that if you put an electrode in the substantia nigra, which is Parkinson's, most of it is caused by cell loss in the brain, part of the brain called the substantia nigra. And they showed that by stimulating the brain in that area, that you get a fairly impressive a reduction in tremor and improved function in patients with Parkinson's, maybe a 30% improvement, which can really improve your quality of life. There have been several groups that have injected stem cells and other cells into that area. Those haven't shown any benefit to date. But there's a lot of different stem cells, and they're not all the equal. So you got to figure out which is the right one and how to treat them right before they behave right to do what you want. So maybe someday that we'll be able to replace the cells that are lost that seem to cause Parkinson's. They've used this non-invasive neurostimulation device to treat a few Parkinson patients, and the inventors claim that it benefits them. I can't believe that yet. So we're going to test one thing for TBI and do it in a randomized, blinded, placebo-controlled trial and see if it really has any benefit or not. I don't know, but we'll find out at least over the next year or two. But we hope I get asked that every other day. And I think the good thing about this technology is it's safe. And it's potentially inexpensive. But safety that's a big deal. It's a lot easier, if I may say, with all due respect to the neurosurgeons. I'd much rather stimulate my tongue with a depressor and a microelectrode 20 minutes twice a day than get an electrode plunged into my brain. I think that's it. Oh, I guess one more. Yes, sir, ma'am.
Movie like I do. I have a little bit of skin in the game, like this whole road does. So I have MS that's probably from CTE is the hypothesis. I played in the NFL, and as I guess my question is, how long? I know that these have a monetary in these types of studies. So akin to the 50-year question, how long is this study going to go? So that those of us that have some degenerative issues have a little bit of hope.
They're hoping. Well, first, the way the FDA has ruled this a minimum risk device. So that's good. That means that if it works, if it's efficacious, safety is not going to be a concern. And so those pass much quicker through the FDA, or should. They're hoping that this will be FDA approved within 2 years. But I can say, I have to work with the FDA, and I want to maintain great relationships with them. But they can be capricious in some of their, and some of the things you think should go through quick don't seem to do that. But I'm pretty sure that for a certain indication, for TBI, it will be probably FDA approved within 2 years. That's what we're planning for. And then, is it approved for CTE or MS? No. But once it's approved for one indication, a physician at their discretion can use it off-label for whatever they want. Since I'm not a member of the company, I can promote off-label FDA use.